I am so excited to be embarking on today's project. Some of you may recall in past videos, I think in particular at the start of the year, I mentioned that I had a huge project in the works for which I, was going to open it up to the community in case any of you wanted to help. Today, we are doing like the prologue to that project. Before I begin such a huge undertaking, I do want to do a little bit of workshopping. So I'm going to make a prototype. It's going to be similar to the huge project, just a lot smaller in scope. It's basically a way for me to get an idea of what sort of pieces I need to crochet, how I could potentially crochet the feature piece, which for those unfamiliar is going to be a skeleton. Where the community element comes into it is I am in the process of setting up a PO box. I will put the address here if I have organized that by the time I get around to editing, but it'll also be linked down in the description. So if you would like to participate in this massive project, please do not feel obligated. Nobody has to do this, but if you would like to, you can contribute pieces. Just send them to the PO box down in the description. I will give more details at the end, so if you're interested in pieces, patterns, color palette, all that sort of thing, I will cover that all at the end. But for now, I want to dive straight into this project. What I've decided on for this smaller piece is to do a dinosaur skeleton. At first, I wanted to go with some sort of like theropod, just because most of my favorite dinosaurs are some species of theropod. But in the end, I've chosen to go with a triceratops just because it has a more distinctive skull shape. And I thought that would be a little bit more interesting to look at than just, a skull with sharp teeth, which is what a lot of theropod skulls are. So we're going to make that, and then we're going to affix that to a canvas which has a sort of moss undergrowth inspired background, somewhat similar to my moss wall thing here, but just with a little bit more variety. Before I can begin crocheting though, I will have to design this thing. So that's what we're going to do first. Well, this is what I'm working with. I've got myself a 2D Triceratops skull. If I compare that to the canvas that I'm working with, it is potentially a little bit big. There's still quite a bit of room for the undergrowth around the skull here, but I'm wary of covering too much of the surface with just the skull. I want a bit of balance. I want plenty of undergrowth, but I want the skull to be fairly prominent, just not too prominent, if that makes sense. But now that I've got the rough shape that I want, I can adjust the sizing a little bit in the next step. And that step is going to be taking my 2D sketch and turning it into a 3D skull. I'm not going to be constructing the entire skull. It's going to be sort of bisected. So I'm doing one half of the skull. I've just completed my first crochet piece of this project, which is the lower jaw piece. I like it so far. I think the shaping is decent. No complaints there at that stage. But I'm just sitting here wondering what my next step is going to be. I've made 2 wireframes for both the upper part of the skull and then the lower jaw. So this was the small inner piece, and then I've made this outer frame, which is the larger piece. My thought was to make these pieces three-dimensional by first crocheting the smaller inner piece and then crocheting around the outer larger piece, and then like putting them together, if I get in the right way, like so, and there'd be crochet in between to make them three-dimensional like that. So eventually they'd be crocheted together as one piece. I don't know if that's going to work, but even if it did, it might not be the most efficient way to do this. Now I'm considering simply crocheting out or off the smaller piece, and once I've added some like depth to it, then crocheting that section onto the larger wire frame. This one's kind of a tough one for me. I've never done anything like this, and I could make it so much more straightforward if I either A, crocheted just an entire Triceratops skull, or B, just made it completely two-dimensional. So I just make this piece like this and I'd put that flat on the canvas. But neither of those options really work for me because I think the full Triceratops skull is just going to be too big, and this canvas is going to be placed vertically anyway. If it was horizontal, that would be an entirely different thing. I could just place the skull. So for example, the horns would come out like here and the nose would be here. That would be fine. But because I want it vertical, that presents a problem. In this situation, the horns would be like poking out this way. You'd only view like the top of the skull, which I don't want. I want a side view of it. And then if I had it just two-dimensional, I mean, that's just kind of boring. It's not much of a challenge, you know, project-wise, but also it's just going to get overtaken by the foliage I plan to have on this canvas anyway. So yes, I could make this simpler on myself, but I don't want to. Well, we now have ourselves a lower jaw. A magnificent mandible. This actually did work out okay. I am still like slightly concerned how I'm going to make it work with the upper portion of the skull. But as a standalone piece, it does its job. I think this looks like the lower jaw of my Triceratops here. Speaking of the upper portion of the skull, that is the piece that I need to crochet next. I am debating whether or not I should approach this the same way I did the lower jaw. The reason I hesitate a little bit is because I'm gonna have to include the spaces for like the nasal cavity, or what I assume is the nasal cavity, and the eye socket. That potentially should not be that difficult. I just have to skip some stitches. But I'm wondering exactly how much doing so will like decrease the structural integrity of the top of the skull, because this is going to be a much larger piece than this section here. This one on its own, it stands up all right. Just the two pieces of wire I've used in this, you know, they're holding up the weight of the crochet fine. I don't know if that's going to be the case with this larger piece. I also have to factor in that in addition to the piece itself, which is very large, I'm going to be attaching these pieces as well as some of the ridges on the crest here. So the more I add to this upper skull piece, it's just going to keep increasing the weight of it. And that could end in disaster, or at least a very misshapen crochet piece. And I don't really know how to combat that, except perhaps adding in some additional wiring for like increased support. I think this is going to be a piece where I have to figure things out as I go. At the moment, it's giving more Plague Doctor Mask than Triceratops Skull, but no worries, we will transform it. Now that the 2D flat part is finished, I will convert it into 3D, but for this piece of the skull, I do want to make sure that I'm leaving enough room down the bottom here to attach it to the bottom part of the jaw. My plan to accomplish that is stitch markers. So if I pop you, say, there, and grab out a couple of these bad boys, 1 and 2. That's roughly where I want it to be, I think. So I'd say from there to, I want the gap to be a little bit wider than that, to maybe there or there. So I don't want to be putting crochet or much crochet in this section here, because otherwise the top of the skull is going to sit much higher than the bottom of the skull. And while I would like a slight height difference, I don't want that to be like really pronounced. I finished the skull, and you know what? I'm really pleased with how this turned out. It is closer to the original drawing than I probably expected to get. There are some areas where the shaping is a little bit off. I don't think I got the horns quite right, and perhaps the eye socket and the nasal cavity could have been a little bit larger, but those are just minor little grievances I have. Overall, I really like how this looks, and I think it's going to work well on my background. So now that the skull is mostly completed, I probably want to add just a few more little details. If we refer back to the drawing, there's just like a few details on the skull itself, and even like a few teeth down here. I might want to add some of those just to give it a bit more, I was going to say life, but that probably doesn't apply to a skull. Just to give it a bit more dimension is probably a better word, but that can be done at the end. I don't need to do that now. What I do want to do now is begin the process of adding my leaves and moss and all the undergrowth stuff that I'm going to use. One of the main reasons I wanted to do this prototype piece was to work out different patterns and different techniques I could use in the background, and then take what I learned here and apply it to my big dragon skeleton project. So I'm not going to be using solely crochet on this. I do want to, I don't know, try other things. Well, I'd like to get this finished sometime soonish, so that's enough rambling from me for now. Let's get started with this. I think I'm going to start with the non-crochet pieces, and then I'll use the crochet stuff to sort of fill in the gaps, which means I'm gonna have to go through my junk pile. I've collected all my junk. I have an old faux fur rug. I have the mesh from my misadventures attempting latch hooking. It's going to give me flashbacks and nightmares if I look at that too long. And then I have a piece of fake grass. I'm pretty sure my sister gave me this. Why she had a square of fake grass, I have no idea, but who am I to judge? And in addition to these, I've grabbed out just my bag of miscellaneous green yarns. So I'll be using those as well. I'll be using the yarns with the mesh. I'm going to put that there. With the rug, I'm going to dye this green, or at least a portion of it. And then with the grass, I don't need to do all that much really. I'm just going to cut a section and I'm going to attach that straight onto the canvas. I've been putting in a bit of work crocheting all the bits I'll need for the background of my Triceratops skull thing, and I need to take a break from that for a while. So in the meantime, I thought I would have a go at dyeing my little bits of faux fur here. And then 1 and 2 kindly, I got this. I think that's everything I need. If not, I'll just have to get up and grab it. So there's 3 things that I want to try here. I've got out my tie-dye from the experiment I did a few months ago involving tie-dye and bleach. I thought I would use that up. Probably shouldn't do that while I'm talking. I'm not confident this is going to dye the synthetic fur. Then I've also got food coloring, and I'm going to see if this will work in dyeing synthetic fur. And then lastly, I want to try dry brushing. I'm just going to use an acrylic paint and then dry brush that on one of these fur pieces. If I'm being honest, I'm probably most optimistic about the dry brushing. I think that'll work the best, but it also is going to take the longest to do. That being the case, I'll go with the smallest piece of faux fur yarn for that. But for the other 2, I'm simply going to stick them in here and then add the dyes and all the water on top of that. Well, it's been about 24 hours, just over 24 hours since I dyed my faux fur, and it went about as well as I expected. This is the tie-dye. So from being a very dark, deep green, this is what I got. And then this was the food coloring, which again is pretty much in line with my expectations. This one, at least, the tie-dye, that's going to be usable. It's not a dark green, but it is a green, and because I'm using various different shades in this piece, I will be able to utilize that, so that's fine. But the same cannot be said for this one, so I will set this aside for now, and depending on how much space I have left after I've attached all the pieces that I already have, I might go ahead and dry brush this one too, just in a different shade of green, and I can then incorporate into the project. But if I have enough pieces, I'm just going to toss that back into the junk pile. Yeah, but even though I felt like I've been working on this for ages now, I still don't think I have quite enough pieces. So I need to do a little bit more crocheting. I have reached the stage where I can begin assembling this piece. From past experience making this one over here, I know that it's likely I don't have enough pieces, but I can begin gluing or sewing them down now, and once I do that, it will give me a good idea of how many more I need to make. I mean, I'd be happy if I didn't have to make any more, but the chances are I will need to. But before I actually start the assembly process, there is one more thing I need to do, and that is paint my canvas. After weeks of work, we have finally reached the assembly stage. I can begin putting my skeleton prototype together. I think I mentioned previously that I'm not sure if I will have enough of my crochet pieces, but that is something we will figure out as we go. This piece here was actually an offcut from my misadventures in latch hooking. I don't think I filled it up quite as much as I could have. It's a little bit like balding in spots, so I think that will be one that can go partially under the triceratops. I think something like that works. So it's still visible, it's just not completely visible, it's partially obscured. And with some of these pieces, they are thicker or taller, such as like the pom-poms. There's a couple of these pieces that I made from thicker weight yarn. Those ones, I sort of want to keep them towards the outside of the piece for the most part. I want a little bit of height variance within the moss, but for the most part, I want the larger pieces to stay on the outside. The trick is now keeping it all in position as I begin gluing. Thankfully, I have a recording of what all this looks like, so I can consult that if I need to. This is probably a bit low, isn't it? I'll change the camera. I have one crochet piece left to glue down, and you can see there's a big gap here, and that's where you would think I would place it. However, early on in this project, I said I wanted to try different things to create grass. The faux fur was one of those things. I used the latch hooking piece, but the other one I grabbed out was the fake grass. I have not placed it yet, just because I think it looks slightly ridiculous with all the rest of the pieces. It very obviously stands out, but I figure, like, yes, I do want to try it, and if I place it here, it's going to be partially under the skull anyway. I'll double check that. So it's going to be like under there. I think if I give this a bit of a trim, providing it still looks okay, it's not like too scraggly, I think that's going to be fine to go there. And then this place I'll use to fill just a little gap that I have at the bottom here. There's certainly other places that could potentially benefit from having pieces added to them, but I'm not going to do that until after I've added the skull, because the skull may just cover up some of those areas, so there's not really much point crocheting additional pieces if you're not going to see them. So for now, that's it for the crocheting. I'll set this aside. I'm going to give the grass a haircut and glue that there. Alright, so yeah, I definitely don't really like how the grass looks, but as I said, I just wanted to try it, and it is going to be mostly hidden from view, so I'm not like too concerned about its inclusion ruining the overall look. So that will go there. I just want to attach this piece here. I'm gonna give that a sec, but then I'm gonna stand this thing up and I want to see how many of my pieces fall off, because potentially I've forgotten to glue some down, but also there are areas that I've left unglued because I want the pieces to partially fall off the canvas. I don't want them to be squashed flat against it. I want some dimension to this piece. So that should be okay now. We're going to stand this up. Aha! We have one. All the rest seem okay, so I'm just going to put you down. Where can I place you? You should probably go in here somewhere, shouldn't you? Maybe here. And that is my moss undergrowth background all taken care of. And you know what? I think I actually like this combination better than my moss wall. Yeah, I kind of like that. I approve, which bodes really well for my massive dragon skeleton project. Oh, this took so long. I cannot imagine how long that one's going to take. But now the moss is attached, I'm just going to clean it up because there's bits of glue everywhere. But I'm going to attach the Triceratops skull. Originally, I was going to add some details to this, but I'm not going to do that at this stage, just because I've been struggling a bit with like hand pain and such, given the change in the weather. And I don't necessarily think it needs it. It would add a little bit to the project, and there's nothing stopping me from coming back later and embroidering some on. But at this stage, I just want to go ahead and attach it. That's all glued down. Now the big test. Will it fall off when I pick it up? Had to reset the camera again, but it is test time. It is test time. Keep your fingers crossed for me, please. And 3, 2, 1. It stays. It stays. I am stoked with how this has turned out. I'm a little disappointed that, oh, bloody hell, don't drop it now. But I'm a little bit disappointed that the skull is missing its details, but I have to very carefully manage my crochet time at the moment. So I left them off. I don't think it detracts from the overall piece too much, but I can come back in at a later date and add those. But I really like this. I am very partial to dinosaurs. If you've been on the channel for any length of time, you probably know that. And I also have a fondness for nature, and specifically like fantasy inspired, you know, landscapes and nature and all that. So to combine those two elements into one project it just rockets this piece up to one of my favorite projects to have work on. And this isn't even everything I want to include in that bigger project I've been talking about. I also want to include in that probably like fungi, mushrooms, some sort of stick bark type things if I can make that work, even little insects and just little critters that live in the undergrowth. I think that would just take that project to the next level. So I'm going to put this down for a bit, because speaking of that next project, I'm going to give you all the details if participating in it is something you're interested in. As I said, please do not at all feel obligated. This is not something that you have to do. It's not something I expect anyone to do. It's just, I know this project is going to be massive, probably the biggest project I've done to date, and it's gonna take me a lot of yarn and a lot of time. So if you'd like to help out, you are welcome to, but I certainly don't expect it of anyone. So this bloody project is just about 4 times the size of this. It's at least twice as long and twice as tall. So it's basically 4 of these. This project, I can't remember the exact figure, but I crocheted between about 600 and 700 pieces for that alone. And I didn't include a big bloody skeleton on top of it. So there's a lot going on. The pieces that will go into it, as I mentioned just before, are going to be pieces like this. anything that gives moss, grass, lichen, stuff you would find in the undergrowth. On top of that, like mushrooms, fungi, insects, all those things that I just went over like 30 seconds ago. The color palette is going to be basically what you see here. With the greens, they all sort of have a blue undertone. I've avoided any of the greens that have more of that yellow undertone. So that is going to be the color palette. For colors themselves, again, reference the background, the blues, the purples, a bit of whites and creams, stuff like that. A bit of pink can be thrown in. You can find that sporadically throughout my background too. If you're unsure what patterns you can crochet for this project, I will be making a short video tutorial on a number of these different pieces. They're all really quick and easy. Most of them, to be honest, just use chains. Other than that, I think that is basically it. I'm going to take care of the entire skeleton myself. It's just if you want to help out with the background, you can. The address where you could potentially send those pieces, I will put up here on screen if I have it. If not, it will be linked down in the description. I went to set up my PO box. I was told that I had to do it online. I went to do it online, and now the online form is telling me, no, you have to go in store. So I don't have the address as of filming this, but hopefully by the time the video goes up, that information will be present here. It will be down in the description. If not, if there is some issue, it hasn't been organized in time, just check back in a week or two. I will put the information down there then, and I might even put it up in a community post so you don't have to worry about coming back to the video. But yeah, it's so frustrating. But enough about my annoyance with the post office, because it is time for... And today's featured creator on the hookup is Lisa, or By the Yarnful, and she says, I've been crocheting for many years, at least 7 to 8, but who's counting? I've dabbled in all sorts of types of crochet, from amigurumi to clothing, filet to Tunisian, and more. Nowadays, I take commissions for just about anything. Let's leave the complex, detailed amigurumi to the pros though. And on my own time, make garments and accessories to sell at craft markets. Oh, that's really cool. I've always been on the fence about trying craft markets myself. So, well, By the Yarnful, because you mentioned it, or anybody else, what is your experience with craft markets? Have you ever attended one as a seller? And if so, what was your experience? Because I would just be interested to know. Now, all of By the Yarnful's links will be down in the description, and so will a hookup form if you would like to apply for the hookup yourself. Before we finish up, final thoughts on my SKULL-pture. I feel that pun works better in written form than verbally. I genuinely really like it. It gives me a lot of confidence about my bigger project. A little bit bummed I didn't add the details, but like that's a minor little flaw. I can get over that, or I can add them later. When it comes to the skull itself, I'm surprised with sort of how close I got it to the original drawing. One bit of criticism I could level at the piece is that I would have liked some of the areas of moss to come up further, sort of up the sides of the skull and perhaps even flowing over the top. I could have achieved that by perhaps putting the skull or attaching the skull first and then putting the moss around it. But as I said earlier, I think that would have made trying to put moss underneath it a lot more difficult. But then again, maybe I could have done that moss first, place the skull, and then put the rest of the moss around it. You live and learn. But overall, I am really happy with how this turned out. And now I have a new addition for my background. I've got to figure out somewhere to put it, but you know, we can workshop that later. But that is all I have for you guys. Don't fall. That is all I have for you guys today. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think of the trike skull? Again, all the details about the upcoming project. Well, I say upcoming. To be honest, it's probably going to take me like 2 years to finish this project, but all details about the upcoming dragon skeleton version of this will be down in the description, possibly the pinned comment. If the PO box address is not there, that'll be coming at a later date. I don't trust the post office at this stage, so who knows when that will eventuate, but it will happen soon. Thank you all very much for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Like the video if you enjoyed it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and I will see you in the next one.